This is the exact moment Speaker Mike Johnson cornered Representative Ilhan Omar in a Capitol Hill hearing room, forcing her to confront a devastating trail of alleged perjury, campaign finance controversies, and her infamous remarks about September 11th, ultimately leaving the chamber in absolute stunned silence. Some people did something. That was the exact phrasing Representative Ilhan Omar utilized to describe the catastrophic events of September 11th during a speech at a banquet in California back in March of 2019. Now, fast forward to a tense hearing room where just 26 minutes ago, the son of one of those fallen Americans had walked in wearing a simple t-shirt. The shirt bore her exact controversial words printed in stark white letters against a black background. Beneath that quote was a name, Robert Frank Harros, and underneath his name, a date forever etched in history, September 11th, 2001. Across the witness table, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson of Louisiana peered at her over a simple yellow legal pad resting in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the precise, unwavering cadence of a constitutional lawyer who had spent 2 decades arguing before judges. A man who had meticulously read every page of the brief. He stated, "Congresswoman, I am going to ask you one question about one phrase, about one specific day. If you want to witness a masterclass in political accountability, keep paying attention because you are about to see a speaker from Shreveport, Louisiana, ask one of America's most polarizing political figures to explain 4 simple words to the son of a man who perished in the South Tower at 9:17 a.m. Let us rewind 26 minutes to understand how this confrontation began. Representative Ilhan Omar was 4 minutes into her opening remarks. She was dressed sharply in a navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, her hijab securely pinned with a small silver emblem shaped like the state of Minnesota. That pin briefly caught the glare of the C-SPAN cameras from 12 feet away. The hearing itself was officially titled Foreign Influence in U.S. Federal Programs and Member Conduct, and it had been locked onto the Joint Committee's schedule for 6 entire weeks. Omar had been formally invited as a former member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. She had casually reviewed the witness list on her flight from Minneapolis the previous night. And apparently, there were no names on that roster that caused her any concern. Looking down at the Speaker of the House, who sat at the lower bench equipped with nothing but a yellow legal pad, she perceived a man who seemed entirely unprepared. She continued her fiery statement, declaring, "With respect to the Speaker, and I do mean respect because I honor anyone who has reached the second highest position in the United States government, I find it deeply concerning that the man who now sits in the chair, once held by Tip O'Neill, by Henry Clay, by Sam Rayburn, is a man who has spent 2 decades of his legal career arguing that women should not have rights over their own bodies, that gay Americans should not be granted full citizenship, and that immigrants like me should be perpetually questioned about our fundamental loyalty before we are even extended the basic dignity of being heard." The Democratic side of the Joint Committee offered polite, supportive smiles. A staffer, seated in the second row, discreetly offered a small thumbs up. But Omar was not quite finished. She leaned into her microphone and added, "And I would also note, Ms. Speaker, that this hearing about so-called foreign influence is itself a manifestation of foreign influence, because the people who orchestrated this hearing are not everyday American voters. They are evangelical donors who fund your political campaigns. They are Christian nationalists who desire to turn this country into a theocracy. They are the exact same people who, in 2017, instructed you to label my faith, Islam, a dangerous religion. Mr. Speaker, you do not speak for my country. You speak for theirs." She sat back, confident in her delivery. However, what Omar did not know, what absolutely nobody in that hearing room knew except the man she had just boldly insulted, was that the Speaker had spent the entirety of the previous evening sitting alone at his desk in the Capitol. Accompanying him was just one trusted staff member, 3 heavily annotated printed pages retrieved from the House Oversight Committee record, and a thick manila folder overflowing with Federal Election Commission filings. He had also brought along a small, leather-bound book tucked quietly into his coat pocket. He had distilled all of this vast, complex information, everything except the contents of the manila folder, into a single, devastating sequence of handwritten notes on that yellow legal pad. 8.5 by 11 inches, filled entirely in deliberate pencil strokes. That very legal pad was now resting on the lower bench right in front of him. Across the aisle, Speaker Mike Johnson, a 54-year-old veteran of legal and political combat, did not immediately respond. He did not hurriedly lift his pen. He did not nervously adjust his glasses. He did not reach for the microphone. Instead, he gently set the blue Bic ballpoint pen in his right hand down onto the legal pad in one smooth practice motion. The pen rolled exactly 1 inch before coming to a stop. 16 agonizing seconds of pure silence passed. Slowly, he opened the legal pad to the very first page of his handwritten notes. He picked up his reading glasses from the wooden bench, bypassing the urge to clean them, and simply placed them on his face. He reached out and turned the microphone directly toward himself. Congresswoman, with all due respect, his voice emerged surprisingly quiet. It was the specific, controlled tone a constitutional lawyer employs when he is about to meticulously walk a hostile witness through a brief that the witness clearly has not prepared for. I am not here today as the man who drafted the Marriage and Conscience Act back in 2015. I am not sitting here as the former chairman of the House Subcommittee on the Constitution. I am not here simply as a Southern Baptist. I am sitting here today strictly as the duly elected Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. And the profound constitutional question before this committee, and before the 4 million Americans currently watching this broadcast, is one singular question. He paused, his eyes locked firmly onto the legal pad. Whether a member of this esteemed body, who has allegedly lied to a federal court, lied to the Internal Revenue Service, lied to a national television audience regarding the location of millions of dollars of campaign donor money, lied about the tragedy of September 11th in front of an audience in California, and sat comfortably on the Foreign Affairs Committee holding top secret security clearance for 4 years, while her own state was reportedly funneling tens of millions of dollars to a designated terrorist organization, whether such a member should be permitted to continue to serve. His eyes slowly lifted, finding Omar's gaze. That is the constitutional question, Congresswoman. It is not a debate over whether I speak for your country. It is a question of whether you have ever, in your entire political career, told the unvarnished truth about anything that actually mattered. The hearing room plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence. And before we begin, Johnson continued, for the official record, since you felt compelled to mention my faith, I want to read you something directly from your own application submitted to the state of Minnesota, filed strictly under penalty of perjury. He took a brief beat about a man named Ahmed. The harsh lighting caught the rim of his reading glasses. The handwriting on page 1 of his legal pad was exceptionally small and tight, exactly how an attorney structures notes during a high-stakes deposition. Congresswoman, in 2017, you physically signed a sworn application presented to the state of Minnesota. That application was a formal divorce filing governed under Minnesota state law. That legal document was filed under penalty of perjury. You explicitly stated in writing that you had not maintained any contact with Mr. Ahmed nor Saeed Elmi since June of the year 2011. He paused to let the timeline sink in. 6 entire years of zero contact. Congresswoman, that is exactly what you swore to the state of Minnesota under the strict penalty of perjury. He then took the legal pad and rotated it exactly 90 degrees on the wooden bench. Neatly clipped to the upper left corner of page 2 was a photograph. It was an 8 by 10 print, slightly faded, secured firmly by a simple paperclip. This is an Instagram photograph, Johnson stated clearly. It was publicly posted in June of 2015. The social media account belongs entirely to you. The handle was Hami. The location tag officially marks it as London. He held the page up. Immediately, the C-SPAN robotic camera tracked the movement and found the photograph. The producer in the control truck quickly zoomed in, allowing 12 million American screens to watch the image suddenly fill their living rooms. It showed a young woman wearing a hijab, smiling brightly, standing next to a young man dressed in a casual button-down shirt. The young woman's hand rested comfortably on the young man's shoulder. You are standing directly next to a man, Congresswoman. That man's legal name is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Your hand is placed gently on his shoulder. You are smiling for the camera. This specific photograph is undeniably dated 4 years after you swore a binding oath to a Minnesota court claiming that you had absolutely not seen him since 2011. He deliberately set the page back down. Now, Congresswoman, I have practiced as a constitutional lawyer for 2 solid decades. I have personally read tens of thousands of sworn legal statements. And I want to take a moment to explain to the millions of people watching this, hearing precisely what this means in plain, accessible English, not in convoluted legalese. His eyes remained fixed on Omar. You legally signed a binding court document. You wrote down in your own handwriting that you had not seen this specific man in 6 years. You then subsequently traveled to London. You took a photograph with him. You posted that photograph on the internet. Perhaps you forgot, or perhaps you merely assumed nobody would bother to look, forgetting that the internet preserves photographs forever. He paused, letting the weight of the digital footprint resonate. And then, in 2019, you confidently took the oath of office to serve in the United States Congress. A mere 2 months later, you were prestigiously appointed to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You successfully received a top-secret security clearance, which necessitates that the Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted a rigorous background check on your history. You did not, on that comprehensive background check, mention the alleged perjury. You did not, on that background check, mention the existence of the photograph taken in London. You did not, on that background check, mention a single piece of any of this. Another heavy pause. The Federal Bureau of Investigation generally does not allow individuals to lie to it on a federal background check without facing severe consequences. So, logically, either the FBI completely failed to discover in 2019 what virtually every conservative blogger had already publicly published back in 2016, or you intentionally lied to the FBI as well. There is no magical third option. There rarely ever is. Off in the wings of the hearing room, Omar's communications director, a young woman named Imani Hassan, who had faithfully worked for Omar since 2019, abruptly stopped typing on her phone. She slowly lowered her device, holding the screen facing downward, adopting the posture of someone who suddenly realizes that whatever message they were just about to send is no longer the most urgent matter in the room. Omar's voice finally broke the tension, carrying the highly polished preparation she typically reserved for cable news appearances. Speaker Johnson, these baseless allegations regarding my marriage have been endlessly, wisely dated for years within conservative media echo chambers. They are entirely without merit. Mr. Elmi is not my brother. The state of Minnesota took absolutely no criminal action against me. That case is entirely closed. Congresswoman, Johnson replied, his voice remaining quiet but entirely immovable. The state of Minnesota took no criminal action because the state of Minnesota's Campaign Finance Board concluded, and I am quoting their official findings, not my own opinion, that you had improperly filed joint federal tax returns in 2014 and 2015 alongside a man named Ahmed Hirsi, while you were technically legally married to an entirely different man named Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Furthermore, the board also concluded that you had inappropriately utilized campaign funds to pay for personal travel expenses to Estonia. The board formally ordered you to repay over $3,000 and levied a fine against you. A short beat. That is not closed, Congresswoman. That is a finding of guilt by your own home state's official agency, an agency which contains no Republican members, an agency run exclusively by Democratic appointees in a state that Donald Trump has never once won in a general election. Omar's right hand drifted slowly up toward her hijab. She subtly adjusted the fabric. The motion was incredibly small, yet the high-definition cameras caught every nuance of it. And I am not sitting here asking you whether Mr. Elmi is your brother, Congresswoman. I am not a certified DNA expert. I have not personally reviewed the genealogical records. The Star Tribune newspaper in Minneapolis aggressively attempted to acquire those specific records for 3 long years, and you steadfastly refused to provide them. Your own father, arguably the only person alive who could have definitively settled this lingering question, was formally asked. He respectfully declined to be interviewed. Your own sisters were asked. They also declined. The definitive records that could permanently close this question in your favor undeniably exist somewhere within your possession. Yet, you have refused for 10 entire years to release them. Johnson paused, letting the refusal hang in the air. I am simply asking you, Congresswoman, why a person who is entirely innocent would stubbornly refuse for a decade to produce the basic documents that would instantly prove their innocence to their hometown newspaper, to a state oversight agency, to a federal congressional committee, to the American people. And to this very hearing today, Omar said absolutely nothing. The silence was deafening. The speaker calmly turned the page of his legal pad. The handwriting on this new page was identical. Small, tight, precise pencil marks. He did not immediately read from it. Yet, Congresswoman, I want to be extremely precise about something right now. Because you chose to open this hearing by aggressively suggesting that I am a Christian nationalist who routinely questions the loyalty of immigrants. His voice dropped down another register. It didn't become louder. It became quieter, more penetrating. This country did not ask you to be black. This country did not ask you to be Muslim. This country did not ask you to be a refugee. The country did not demand any of those specific traits from you. Those things are completely irrelevant to the question at hand. He paused. What the country did ask you for was the simple truth regarding the man in that photograph. You have aggressively refused to provide it for 10 years. That is not an act of bigotry against you, Congresswoman. That is the reality of facing consequences for your actions. There is a massive difference. The room remained utterly silent. And the country today is absolutely allowed to ask that question one more time, with the photograph displayed right in front of the cameras, out loud. If you appreciate seeing public officials held to the fire with facts and receipts, stay tuned, because the discussion is about to pivot to a staggering $2.78 million and a highly controversial political consulting contract that blurred the lines between campaign finance and deeply personal relationships. The legal pad turned to page 3. But the photograph taken in London, Congresswoman, isn't actually the most severe betrayal of your political career. The most severe betrayal occurred 4 years later, and the specific woman who ultimately paid the terrible price for it is currently sitting right here in the second row of this very hearing room, located just behind your left shoulder. The broadcast cameras had not yet discovered the second row. They would find it in exactly 4 minutes. For now, they remained tightly focused on Omar's face. Congresswoman, 843 days. A pause. From the exact moment a man named Tim Mynette's wife formally filed for divorce in August of 2019, specifically alleging in legal documents that her husband had confessed to her he was, quote, in love with Representative Ilhan Omar, to the exact moment your political campaign finally, officially terminated its lucrative contract with Mr. Mynette's consulting firm in November of 2020. His voice remained uncomfortably quiet. 843 days, Congresswoman, during which time Mr. Mynette's firm, a political consulting group called the E Street Group, received an astounding $2.78 million directly from your campaign coffers. That money came from the small dollar donors who genuinely believed your campaign was a righteous crusade about removing dark money from politics, about curing a corrupt cancer in Washington. A beat. You paid $2.78 million to your boyfriend's private firm while he was still legally married to another woman, while you were still legally married to another man, and while both of you were actively lying to the National Press Corps about whether the romantic affair existed at all. The legal pad turned to page 4. The handwriting on this specific page looked slightly different. These were exact words from a legal court filing, meticulously copied by hand. I have read the actual divorce filing. Congresswoman Beth Mynette, the wife. She is a highly respected doctor. She serves as the medical director for the District of Columbia Department of Corrections. She formally filed her divorce papers on August 28th, 2019. She wrote, and I am quoting the binding legal filing here, not some gossip tabloid. The legal filing submitted under penalty of perjury. Quote, defendant told the party's minor child, who is 11, that the primary reason for the marital separation was that he had developed romantic feelings for another woman. Defendant has explicitly stated that he is in love with that woman, who is on information and belief, Representative Ilhan Omar." End quote. He paused to let the words settle. That is a formal divorce filing Congresswoman, sworn under rigorous oath by a medical doctor, about her own husband telling their own 11-year-old son that the exact reason daddy was destroying their family and leaving was for you. The speaker did not bother to look up from the legal pad. Instead, he turned his body slightly toward the back of the crowded room. And Congresswoman, I would like to take this moment to acknowledge, with the audience's kind indulgence, that Dr. Beth Minette is physically present in this room today. She is sitting right there in the second row, located just behind your left shoulder. She drove up from Washington early this morning. She did not formally RSVP. She did not notify anyone that she was coming. She is not here to publicly testify. She did not ask for the microphone. She simply told my office staff when she arrived this morning that she just desperately wanted to be in the room when this specific question was finally asked out loud. The robotic cameras immediately swiveled and found her. Beth Minette, a woman in her early 50s wearing a professional black blazer over a white blouse, her hair neatly pulled back. She was not openly crying. She was merely sitting there, completely still. Her hands were calmly folded in her lap, motionless. Sitting directly beside her in that same row was a teenage boy, perhaps 17 or 18 years old, wearing a blue button-down shirt and khakis. He was staring intensely at the floor. The cameras had completely overlooked him until this very second. The official Capitol Police visitor log later confirmed that Beth Minette had signed him in as her personal guest at 6:53 a.m. The name written on that sign-in sheet was Noah Minette. Omar's eyes darted quickly over to Beth Minette. They stayed there, refusing to return to the speaker. Now, Congresswoman, while Dr. Minette was agonizingly filing for a divorce in August of 2019, while her deeply confused 11-year-old son was being told that his father was leaving the family for a woman named Ilhan, your political campaign continued to seamlessly write massive checks to Mr. Minette's firm. 146 separate checks over a span of 15 months, totaling $2.78 million. A heavy pause. That immense sum of money came directly from your small dollar donors. It came from the school teachers, the registered nurses, the brave first responders. It came from the exact kind of working class Americans you constantly stand in front of television cameras and claim that you vigorously fight for. They genuinely believed they were funding a righteous political campaign. Instead, they were unwittingly funding your boyfriend, all while he was by his own wife's sworn legal statement, telling his 11-year-old son that he had tragically fallen in love with the exact same woman whose campaign was lavishly paying him. This was the precise moment Ilhan Omar finally stood up. She forcefully pushed her leather chair back 2 inches. She planted both of her hands firmly on the wooden desk in front of her. Her ingrained cable news survival instinct instantly woke up. The accumulated 8 years of generating viral social media clips woke up. The combative energy of the squad press conferences woke up. Her voice began to rise with the exact kind of righteous moral conviction that had, for those past 8 years, played exceptionally well to her base. Speaker Johnson, the Federal Election Commission, conducted an exhaustive review and found absolutely no legal wrongdoing in any of the financial payments my campaign made to the E Street Group. Mr. Minette's firm provided highly legitimate, standard political service. The FEC thoroughly reviewed the entire matter and officially closed it. She took a breath, her tone sharpening. As for my deeply personal life, Mr. Speaker, I am incredibly proud to be the first Black Muslim woman ever elected to the United States Congress. Consequently, I have been the unfair subject of more intense scrutiny, more vicious harassment, and more credible death threats than any other sitting member of this entire body. These baseless allegations regarding my marriage have been obsessively investigated by virtually every conservative media outlet on this planet for over 10 years. And what have they produced? They have produced 0 criminal charges, 0 federal indictments, 0 official findings of fraud. Her index finger jabbed aggressively once into the surface of the desk. What they have actually produced is a relentless, racist, and deeply Islamophobic narrative that maliciously suggests a Somali Muslim woman who was proudly elected by working-class voters in Minneapolis, somehow cannot possibly be telling the truth. And the blatant fact that you, Mr. Speaker, are sitting up here today opening this official congressional hearing by cynically using the words of a man you have never even personally spoken to, Mr. Elmi, about a strictly private family matter. That is itself the glaring evidence of the systemic bigotry that originally motivated me to run for this seat in the first place. I represent the diverse future of this country, Mr. Speaker. You merely represent its outdated past. I am certainly not the one who needs to step down today. The progressive press section gathered in the room began clapping. It started as a single clap, then two. Then a highly partisan producer standing in the back of the room, whose media company had essentially been paying for the exclusive privilege of running an Omar-friendly evening broadcast for 6 straight years, boldly stood up and began clapping with both hands raised high above his head. Someone in the crowd audibly shouted, "Yes!" 2 Democratic House members sitting on the panel offered supportive nods. The MSNBC reporter seated in the front row was seen mouthing the words in real time. That's the soundbite. For 15 full seconds, the energy in the hearing room belonged entirely to Ilhan Omar. Across the wide bench, the speaker did not attempt to interrupt her. He did not make any defensive gestures. He did not move a muscle. The yellow legal pad sat perfectly squared in front of him. His pencil rested casually across page 4. When the partisan applause finally faded into silence, he spoke. His voice was not an ounce louder. It was not an ounce quieter. It was exactly the same measured, chilling tone. "Congresswoman, you confidently said one specific thing in that impassioned statement that I feel compelled to address. You loudly proclaimed 0 findings of fraud." A pause. The Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board, which, as I noted, is a state agency run entirely by appointees of the Democratic governor of Minnesota, located in a blue state that Donald Trump has never won, officially found in 2019 that you had improperly used campaign funds for personal, non-campaign expenses. Legally speaking, that is fraud, Congresswoman, and it was determined by your own home state by Democratic political appointees. Furthermore, that exact same regulatory board found that you had improperly filed joint federal tax returns with a man you were not legally married to at the time. That is also a definition of fraud, Congresswoman, specifically federal tax fraud. And just for the record, federal tax fraud legally carries a potential prison term of up to 3 years per count. You didn't flinch. And finally, you stated that the FEC officially found no wrongdoing in the $2.78 million of payments. In a strictly legalistic sense, that is technically correct. The FEC determined the contracts themselves were formatted legally. However, what the FEC completely failed to address, because it simply falls outside their statutory jurisdiction, is what those massive contracts actually represent in the betrayed eyes of your loyal donors. $2.78 million of hard-earned, small donor money enthusiastically raised on the core message that you would boldly fight the corrupting influence of money in politics, quietly paid directly to your boyfriend's private firm during the exact period of an undisclosed extramarital relationship that ultimately destroyed both of your prior marriages. He leaned in slightly. You may not have technically committed a chargeable crime under FEC guidelines, Congresswoman, but you absolutely committed a profound moral betrayal. And the hardworking people you betrayed are sitting in their living rooms right now, watching this very hearing, sickened, wondering whether their hard-earned $25 political donation actually went to fund a campaign or whether it went to fund a lavish date. The hearing room was plunged back into stunned silence, but the speaker was not finished. He turned the legal pad to page 5. The pencil handwriting on this page appeared slightly lighter, as if it had been jotted down very quickly. Congresswoman, one more thing. You specifically raised the issue, so I will address it head on. Pause. You stated with pride that you are the very first Black Muslim woman ever elected to the United States Congress. That statement is historically true. It is a deeply meaningful first. The entire country should rightfully be proud of that historic milestone. His voice dropped to a near whisper. What the country should absolutely not be proud of is the tragic second thing that immediately follows that historic first, which is that the first Black Muslim woman elected to Congress cynically utilized her loyal campaign donor base to enrich her boyfriend with $2.78 million while she was legally married to another man, while he was legally married to another woman, and while his devastated wife, Dr. Beth Minette, who is sitting right here in the second row, was at home tearfully explaining to her 11-year-old son why daddy was suddenly leaving the family. A long, agonizing pause. You did not merely break the glass ceiling for Muslim women in Congress, Congresswoman. You brutally broke the floor right underneath Dr. Minette's young son. And the country today is completely allowed to remember the stark difference between those two things. The cameras held a tight, unflinching shot on Beth Minette. She was staring blankly at the back of Omar's head. Her hands had still not moved a fraction of an inch from her lap. Beside her, Noah Minette, now 17 years old, dressed in his blue button-down shirt and khakis, had finally lifted his head. He, too, was staring directly at the back of Omar's head. The speaker methodically turned the legal pad to page 6. The handwriting on this page looked entirely different. It was much slower, with each individual letter pressed incredibly hard into the paper, leaving deep indentations. Congresswoman, March 23, 2019. You delivered a highly publicized speech at a banquet hosted by the Council on American Islamic Relations located in Woodland Hills, California. The audience in attendance was approximately 500 people. The entire speech was professionally recorded. The video is widely available online. Anyone watching this hearing can easily look it up and watch it tonight. His voice remained quiet, perfectly measured, and slow. In that specific speech, Congresswoman, you uttered the following exact sentence, and I am going to quote your words directly. You said, quote, "CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties." End quote. He looked up just once, his eyes piercing. Some people did something. Those were the exact words you consciously chose, Congresswoman, to casually describe the horrors of September 11th in front of a supportive audience a mere 6 months after you proudly took the solemn oath of office to serve in the United States Congress. A heavy pause settled over the room. 2,977 innocent Americans died, horrific deaths on September 11th. 2001, Congresswoman, 343 of those victims were brave firefighters. 23 of them were dedicated New York police officers. 37 of them were heroic Port Authority police officers. The rest of them were everyday citizens. They were school teachers, they were bond traders, they were janitors, they were window washers. One was a hardworking man who dutifully delivered the mail to the 88th floor of the South Tower every day for 14 years. One was a pregnant woman whose loving husband was anxiously waiting for her to return home to Brooklyn. Pause. They were absolutely not some people, Congresswoman. They were human beings. They had names, they had faces, they had families who loved them. They had heartbreaking funeral services. 2,977 of them, and the radical terrorists who murdered them. The evil men you casually described as merely those who did something, they had names too. They had a very specific name for the horrific act they committed. They proudly called it violent jihad. They specifically named the nation they desperately wanted to bring to the ground. They explicitly named it America. They were not merely some people who did something. They were 19 named radicalized hijackers executing a highly coordinated, named military operation against a very specific, named civilian target on a named date in history. They ruthlessly committed the largest act of mass murder on American soil in our nation's entire history. And yet, you chose to describe that apocalyptic event, Congresswoman, using the casual language one might use to describe misplacing an umbrella. The hearing room was locked in a stunned silence. A reporter for The Atlantic, sitting in the third row, had completely abandoned the pretense of taking notes. He was simply staring, mesmerized. Now, Congresswoman, the grieving people who were left behind by those 2,977 dead Americans, the widowed spouses, the fatherless children, the weeping grandchildren. They are very much still alive today. Many of them are still profoundly angry, and some of them have been patiently waiting for 6 excruciating years for someone wielding a federal microphone to finally ask you exactly what you meant by those 4 deeply offensive words. The speaker turned his body slightly toward the back of the expansive room. And one of those people is sitting in this hearing room today. He is seated in the 3rd row from the back, positioned on the audience's left aisle. He drove all the way up from Wall Township, New Jersey, early this morning. He arrived at the Capitol building at 6:15 a.m. The Capitol Police security detail had no idea he was coming. He brought a cherished photograph of his deceased father with him. He also brought a customized t-shirt. The broadcast cameras instantly swiveled to the back of the room. In the 3rd row from the back, on the audience's left side, a man slowly stood up. He appeared to be roughly 58 years old. He had the rugged build of a construction supervisor, with graying hair at his temples. He was wearing a stark black t-shirt. The bold white letters printed on the front of the shirt spelled out in massive block capitals, "Some People Did Something," by Ilhan Omar, March 23rd, 2019. Immediately underneath those words, printed in slightly smaller letters, was a name, Robert Frank Harrows, and underneath the name was a date, September 11, 2001. He was tightly gripping an 8x10 framed photograph in his hands. The Republican chairman of the Joint Committee, a conservative representative from Texas, who had been quietly briefed about this specific man's presence at 6:21 a.m., gave a solemn nod. The chair recognizes Mr. Harrows. The man slowly walked down the aisle toward the witness microphone. As he approached the center of the room, members of the press section began to recognize him from old news clippings. A seasoned reporter in the 2nd row was heard whispering audibly, "Holy." 3 of the Democratic House members sitting on the panel had previously served on the Foreign Affairs Committee back in 2019. They immediately recognized him, too. Not a single one of them dared to meet his eyes. "My name is Nicholas Harrows, Jr.," the man began, his voice thick with unyielding emotion. "I am 58 years old. I work hard as a construction supervisor. I live in Wall Township, New Jersey. My father's name was Frank Harrows. He worked diligently in building maintenance at the World Trade Center. He had been employed there for 26 long years. He was 62 years old. He was exactly 3 years away from a well-deserved retirement when the hijacked plane violently hit the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, pause. My father called my mother at 9:07 a.m., exactly 4 minutes after the plane struck the building. He frantically told her he was trapped on the 82nd floor, and he said the black smoke was getting incredibly bad, but that they were going to try to use the emergency stairs. He told her how much he loved her. He told her to pass a message to me. I was 28 years old back then. I'm 58 now. He told her to tell me that he was so proud of the man I had become. The phone line suddenly went dead at 9:14 a.m. The immense South Tower completely collapsed at 9:59 a.m. My father's crushed body was finally identified using dental records in March of 2002. He slowly held up the photograph. It was an 8x10 image of a joyful man in his early 60s attending a wedding celebration. The photograph was old enough that the vibrant colors had noticeably begun to fade around the edges. This picture was taken at my wedding in June of the year 2000, exactly 15 months before those terrorists murdered him. My father is proudly standing right here in this photograph, right next to my beautiful wife. Before the wedding, my wife had asked him if he would do her the incredible honor of walking her down the church aisle. Her own biological father had tragically passed away when she was just 7 years old. My father looked at her and said yes. He cried tears of joy that day. I actually have a VHS video recording of him crying. He gently set the precious photograph down onto the witness table, making sure the image was facing straight up for everyone to see. In 2019, Congresswoman, you stood in front of a cheering crowd at a banquet in California, and you casually described the horrific act that those 19 radical men did to my beloved father as merely some people did something. His voice tightened with suppressed rage. I desperately want you to truly understand the weight of what you said. You callously stated that the 19 evil men who brutally murdered my father using a massive passenger jet as a weapon were simply some people. You callously stated that the heinous act of mass murdering my father's innocent coworkers, my grieving mother's husband, my children's loving grandfather, and 2,976 other innocent American citizens was just something that some people did. Something. Pause. His voice remained remarkably steady, anchored by decades of grief. My father had a name, Congresswoman. The evil men who ruthlessly killed him had names, too. The barbaric act of terror they committed had a name. It was absolutely not just something. My father was not just some people. He was Frank Harros. He worked hard in building maintenance for 26 years. He wept tears of joy at my wedding. He died a terrifying death on September 11th, 2001, trapped on the 82nd floor of the South Tower, while his terrified wife clutched the telephone and listened to him say his final goodbye. He reached down and picked up the framed photograph once again. He held it straight forward, pointing it directly at Ilhan Omar's face. I came here to Washington today, Congresswoman, because I want the entire country to finally hear my father's real name said out loud, spoken into a federal microphone right in front of your face, so that the very next time you feel the urge to casually describe his brutal death as just something, you will be forced to remember that one of the innocent people who died during that something was a hardworking American citizen who tirelessly paid the mortgage on the house I grew up in by literally waxing the floors of a building you have likely never even set foot inside. His name was Frank Harros. He died a hero at 9:59 a.m. on September 11th in the South Tower of New York City. He carefully set the photograph back down on the hard witness table, still facing straight up, still facing the unrelenting glare of the C-SPAN cameras. He then turned and slowly walked back to his seat in the third row. He did not look at Omar even once. The speaker did not break the silence immediately. He slowly removed his reading glasses. He meticulously folded them. He placed them delicately on top of the yellow legal pad. He then reached deep into his coat pocket. He smoothly pulled out the small, leather-bound book he had brought with him. The book was compact enough to fit perfectly in the palm of his hand. It was a well-worn pocket Bible. The leather cover was noticeably frayed at the corners. He gently placed the Bible right on top of his folded reading glasses. Congresswoman, I had absolutely no prior intention of quoting scripture during this serious committee hearing today. I have been criticized in the past fairly, I think, by my respected colleagues in both political parties for sometimes leading with my personal faith when I should instead be strictly leading with the text of the law. So, today, I made a point to lead with the law. I presented the alleged perjury in your official divorce filing. I presented the alleged fraud in your joint tax returns. I presented the $2.78 million in highly questionable campaign payments. I presented the exact 4 words you callously said about the tragedy of September 11th. A pause. But what Mr. Harros has just done here today, I simply cannot follow that profound moment with the cold text of the law alone. So, I will follow it with this. He did not need to open the tiny Bible. He had memorized the specific verse years ago. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22. A beat, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. He left the Bible resting peacefully on top of the legal pad. He looked directly at Omar, his gaze piercing through the tension in the room. Congresswoman, I am not sitting here asking you today to miraculously find your personal faith. Your faith is your own private matter. I am simply asking you to finally find Mr. Harros's father's name. Pause. Frank Harros. He was a real man. He had a real name. Say his name. The hearing room was suffocated by silence. In the second row, Noah Minette had not lowered his head back down. He was staring unblinkingly at Omar. If you appreciate moments where evasive politicians are finally forced to confront the human cost of their rhetoric, keep listening, because the next revelation involves a massive financial scandal right in her own backyard, tied to international terror. The speaker systematically turned the legal pad to page 8. The handwriting on page 8 looked as though it had been nervously folded once and then unfolded. Congresswoman, January 8th, 2026. Exactly 2 months ago, the House Oversight Committee convened a major hearing officially titled, and I am reading verbatim from the official committee record here, quote, Oversight of Fraud and Misuse of Federal Funds in Minnesota, Part 1, end quote. His voice remained low, the faint hint of a southern drawl becoming slightly more noticeable. That extensive hearing meticulously examined a massive, highly coordinated financial fraud network. The epicenter of that criminal network was based directly in the state of Minnesota. The network was, according to the sworn, under oath testimony of seasoned federal investigators, the single largest pandemic-era financial fraud in the entire history of the United States. It was allegedly operated by a group of individuals who initially came to Minnesota utilizing the exact same refugee resettlement programs that generously brought you and your own family to America back in 1995. A beat. The staggering amount of taxpayer money stolen, Congresswoman, greatly exceeds $250 million. This was vital federal money, specifically designed to feed hungry American children during the terrifying heights of the COVID pandemic. Stolen while actual American children went hungry. And that stolen money, as the federal investigators explicitly testified under oath before that committee back in January, was systematically routed overseas, including direct wire transfers to Al-Shabaab, the brutal designated terrorist organization that violently operates in Somalia. The exact same terrorist organization that callously killed 224 innocent people in a single devastating truck bombing in the capital of Mogadishu in October of 2017. The exact same terrorist organization that has ruthlessly murdered at least 11 American citizens in various attacks since 2010. The exact same terrorist organization that the United States State Department has formally designated since 2008 as a deadly foreign terrorist organization directly affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Pause. Now, Congresswoman, from January of 2019 all the way through February of 2023, for 4 entire years, you sat powerfully on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You continuously held a top-secret national security clearance. You regularly received highly classified intelligence briefings detailing the activities of foreign terrorist organizations, specifically including Al-Shabaab. The committee discussed the volatile situation in Somalia in heavily classified closed-door sessions more than 30 separate times during that specific period. His eyes locked onto hers. During those exact 4 years, your own home congressional district in Minneapolis served as the absolute epicenter of the largest federal financial fraud network in the entire history of the United States. A criminal enterprise funded by stolen COVID relief money specifically designed to feed starving children. Money that was routed, as federal investigators testified just 2 months ago, directly to a known terrorist organization affiliated with Al-Qaeda, a group actively operating against the American intelligence community, operating directly in the country where your own father proudly served as a military colonel before you immigrated to America. And you, Congresswoman, Johnson's voice grew incredibly firm, said absolutely nothing for 4 entire years. Armed with a top-secret security clearance, armed with access to more classified intelligence information regarding Al-Shabaab than virtually any other sitting member of Congress, proudly representing a heavily Somali American district. You did not bother to write a single public op-ed. You did not bother to introduce a single piece of legislation. You did not bother to give a single impassioned floor speech about the largest financial fraud in American history, operating right out of your own district, actively funding the specific terrorist organization most likely to kill innocent Americans of Somali descent. Pause. Either you fully knew about it, Congresswoman, and you chose to say absolutely nothing, or you somehow didn't know about it, meaning you cluelessly held a top-secret security clearance for 4 years while a massive terror funding operation was happening right in your own political neighborhood, and the FBI somehow completely failed to brief you on it. There is no magical third option. There rarely ever is. Omar's right hand once again drifted slowly up toward her hijab. She adjusted the fabric, but this time, when the nervous motion was completed, she brought her hand firmly back down to the table. Speaker Johnson, these wild allegations regarding al-Shabaab funding originating from Minnesota are entirely unproven and have been cynically weaponized by desperate Republicans to unfairly stigmatize the entire Somali American community, cheap political purposes. Congresswoman Johnson cut in, his voice quiet but slicing through her defense. The allegations were explicitly testified to under oath by veteran federal investigators just 2 months ago before a fully bipartisan committee of the United States House of Representatives. Those seasoned investigators were not partisan Republicans. They were dedicated career officials from the FBI and the Department of Justice. They have faithfully served under both Democratic administrations and Republican administrations. They testified under the strict penalty of perjury that the stolen money went exactly where I just stated it went. The salient question before us today is not whether that sworn testimony exists. It absolutely does. The real question is what you, Congresswoman, sitting powerfully on the Foreign Affairs Committee with a top secret clearance, representing the very district where the massive crime occurred, what exactly you did with the information you possessed, and exactly when you possessed it. The entire country is demanding an answer to that question today. Johnson looked up. Mr. Chairman, with your kind permission, I would like to formally invite 2 additional observers to briefly address the committee. Granted, the chairman replied softly. From the hushed audience, 2 individuals slowly stood up. The first was an older gentleman, perhaps 67 or 68 years old, sporting a white beard and wearing a modest dark suit. He walked steadily toward the witness microphone with the heavy bearing of a man who had walked much further and carried much heavier burdens in his lifetime than just the short distance from a chair to a microphone. My name is Mohammed Farah, the man began, his accent thick but his words clear. I am 67 years old. I came to the United States seeking safety from Somalia back in 1993. I am a devout Sufi Muslim. I proudly run a small, independent grocery store located on Lake Street in the city of Minneapolis. I enthusiastically voted for Representative Ocasio-Cortez's squad back in 2018 because I genuinely believed they would represent the Somali community with honesty and integrity. The heavy, suffocating silence in the hearing room stretched as the heartbroken grandfather continued. My beloved grandson Yusuf was brutally murdered by al-Shabaab terrorists on October 14th, 2017. Mohammed Farah stated, his profound grief echoing through the chamber. He was only 8 years old, happily eating lunch at the Lido Beach restaurant in Mogadishu, when a massive truck bomb detonated, claiming the lives of 224 innocent people. He was the youngest victim identified by name. His mother miraculously survived the blast only because she had briefly stepped outside to call her sister. Reaching into his jacket, he displayed a vibrant photograph of a smiling young boy wearing a bright red t-shirt and holding a soccer ball. Congresswoman, I meticulously read the January hearing transcript detailing how millions in stolen funds from my very own community were secretly routed to the terrorists who killed him. For 8 long years, I have desperately asked my representative what is being done, and I have never received a single call, letter, or email. I am absolutely not asking you for an apology about the stolen money. I am standing here asking why you could not find the decency to pick up a telephone. He sat back down, tightly clutching the cherished photograph to his chest. Next, a woman in her early 50s, wearing a professional black blazer, took the microphone. My name is Sarah Goldstein. I am 51 years old and a proud registered Democrat who voted for Clinton, Biden, and Harris. I reside in Yorktown Heights, New York, she stated. Remarkably, the exact same affluent hometown shared with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. My daughter Sarah was a Jewish junior diligently studying at Columbia University in April 2024 with a sacred mezuzah affixed to her door. On the chaotic night of April 25th, you visited the radical encampment and were officially recorded calling non-participating Jewish students pro-genocide. My daughter wasn't protesting. She was quietly studying for her final exams. The very next morning, she awoke to find her door maliciously defaced with the horrific word genocider alongside a slashed Star of David. Terrified, she took her mezuzah down, withdrew from the university 3 days later, and has never returned. I do not blame you for the physical vandalism. I blame you entirely for wielding the inflammatory word that made that hateful act possible. As she sat down, Ilhan Omar reflexively reached toward her temple to adjust her hijab, a familiar, nervous habit developed over years of highly scrutinized cable television appearances. However, the comforting motion abruptly halted. For 8 agonizing seconds, her trembling fingers merely gripped the dark fabric, leaving the garment noticeably askew by a single centimeter. The unforgiving C-SPAN cameras aggressively zoomed in, broadcasting to 12 million American screens a vivid image of a sitting congresswoman suddenly paralyzed, her head covering visibly off-center. Defeated, she dropped her hand, leaving the hijab uncorrected. Across the tense room, Noah Minette, Beth Minette, Mohammed Farah, Nicholas Harris Jr., and Sarah Goldstein all stared at her in uncompromising silence. 9 heavy seconds later, Speaker Johnson finally spoke, his voice dropping to a gravelly, authoritative low. Congresswoman, I want the 4 million Americans watching today to truly understand the devastating reality of the past 43 minutes. You callously referred to Mr. Harros's father, who heroically worked maintenance at the World Trade Center for 26 years, as simply some people. You sat powerfully on the Foreign Affairs Committee while Mr. Farah's innocent grandson was slaughtered by a group funded directly from your district. You publicly labeled Mrs. Goldstein's daughter pro-genocide, directly leading to her dorm door being viciously vandalized. You accomplished all of this while comfortably sitting in a chamber meant to represent the very people whose names you stubbornly refuse to learn. You betrayed the working class voters, the Somali community, the Jewish community, and the grieving 9/11 families. You fundamentally betrayed the truth about your brother, your boyfriend, the stolen money, the 4 words, and those 4 silent years. Methodically flipping his yellow legal pad to the final page, Johnson revealed a single word, heavily underlined twice: Frank. He deliberately stacked his reading glasses and a small leather-bound pocket Bible onto the pad, folding his hands. Congresswoman, I have one final question about one specific name, yes or no. The massive room froze entirely. Frank Harros, building maintenance, 82nd floor, South Tower, died a hero at 9:59 a.m. on September 11th, 2001. A heavy, breathless pause. Was Frank Harros some people? Yes or no? During the very first second of silence, Omar's left hand drifted aimlessly toward her plastic water bottle. It stopped exactly halfway there. It slowly returned to the wooden table. The second passed. The third. She frantically looked over toward her trusted communications director standing in the wings. But Imani Hassan was no longer looking back at her. Imani Hassan was staring blankly down at her own hands. The fourth, second, the fifth. She slowly looked down at the witness table. Frank Harros's faded photograph was still resting on it. The photograph was facing straight up toward the ceiling. The handsome man in the picture was smiling brightly. He was proudly wearing the nice suit he had worn to his beloved son's wedding. The 6th second passed. The 7th. She nervously glanced toward the back of the expansive room. Mohammed Farah was staring sorrowfully at the floor. The 8th second. She looked over at the second row. Dr. Beth Minette was staring right through her. Noah Minette was glaring at her. The 9th second. She looked down at her own trembling hands. The 10th second. The 11th. The 12th. She finally opened her mouth and stammered, The framing of this entire question is fundamentally yes or no. Congresswoman, Johnson interrupted, his voice like cracking ice. The 13th second passed. The 14th, Omar said absolutely nothing. She pressed her lips tightly together. The speaker slowly nodded just once. He didn't stand, raise his voice, or gather his materials. Mr. Chairman, Johnson said softly, I yield the remainder of my allotted time to Mr. Harros, to Mr. Farah, and to Mrs. Goldstein. They have been patiently waiting for a truthful answer to this exact question for a hell of a lot longer than 14 seconds. The chairman struck the gavel, announcing a 30-minute recess. Representative Ilhan Omar immediately stood up, hastily gathering her scattered papers with visibly disjointed movements. She refused to look at Beth Minette, Noah Minette, Nicholas Harros Jr., or the photograph of his father resting on the witness table. Turning abruptly, she marched toward the exit, ignoring Mohammed Farah and Sarah Goldstein, who stared quietly down at her own hands. At the heavy wooden door, she hesitated. The cameras turned with her as Speaker Johnson remained seated, his gaze fixed on Frank Harros's photograph. "Congresswoman," he called out quietly, "my office door is open anytime. Bring Mr. Harros's father's name. Say it out loud, then we will talk." Offering no response, she walked out, the door closing with a distinct thud. The aftermath was devastating and swift. By noon, 3 hashtags dominated major platforms. Number Frank Harros, number 11-year-old son, and number 4 years. The agonizing clip of Nicholas Harros holding his father's photograph shattered the internet, passing over 40 million views. Quietly, the Memorial Museum added Frank's photograph to its digital display following an emotional phone call from his son. When pressed for comment, Dr. Beth Minette offered one devastating sentence. "My son is 17 now. He is finally allowed to grow up in peace." Noah simply added, "I just wanted her to see me." Omar's communications director released a frantic statement alleging distortion, completely ignoring the victims. The Anti-Defamation League supported Mrs. Goldstein, while other organizations provided completely evasive, empty answers. By sunset, 3 quiet moments unfolded. In New Jersey, Nicholas Harros Jr. endured an exhausting drive home. Arriving at dusk, he carried his father's photograph inside. After waiting 6 agonizing years, he finally took down the painful newspaper clipping regarding Omar's, quote, folding it into his desk. In Minneapolis, Mohammed Farah unlocked his grocery store to a long line of people waiting in the cold simply to shake his hand. In New York, Sarah Goldstein comforted her daughter, who softly, tearfully asked to come home. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar walked out of the Capitol entirely alone. Slipping into an idling black SUV, she offered no destination. The vehicle drove aimlessly for 20 long minutes. The proud country remembered the brave victims. She remained silent.